Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/First Paw Media. From First Paw Media, sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company, this is the Dog Driver Show. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert Forto and Kurosh Partow.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert and I'm here with my co-host KP, and we're talking to a guest calling in from British Columbia, Canada. Who do we have, KP?
Today we have the pleasure of having some mushing royalty with us. You know, there are a few of them around the world that I call, icons. And this couple, when they raced, they dominated our sport. We have the pleasure of having Ross and Tammy Saunderson with us from Fort St. John. Ross, if you don't know him, you're probably not in the sled dog world, I guess. He's been winning Ronde Onak, all the big races many times, extremely competitive open driver, and also a phenomenal bloodline he has, which influenced a lot of the sled dog world I'm running. Ross, welcome to the show, and thank you for being with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and how you started in our sport.
Well, thank you, Robert and KP. I consider it a privilege to be on the Dogworks radio program, and I've listened to some of the other podcasts that you've had with some of the other mushers, and it's a privilege to be here. So my name is Ross Saunderson. I'm located in Fort St. John, British Columbia, about 3.5 hours south of the famous Streeper kennels. They were always our arch rivals during the 1980s and 90s of racing and the sport of sled dogs. I've grown up here since 1974, following in my father's footsteps as a racer.
So you started racing when you were a kid, right, Ross?
Yeah, in 1979, I started. My first 3-dog race was in 1979, and my dad had started in the sport in 1970. I want to say 1970, I think, is when we got our first Alaskan Husky.
And how old were you when you raced your first 3-dog race, Ross?
My first race I was 11 years old. So I was born in 1968.
So tell me how a junior musher, 11-year-old, grows up to be world champion the way you succeeded, and how you came up with the bigger dog team, starting to race all these open class races nationally and internationally.
Well, I kind of followed in my brother's footsteps. My older brother, Rod, he was 4 years older than me. And so my dad, when he started in the sport in 1966, much like the Streeper family, he started with the Siberian Husky, and then in 1970 got his first Alaskan Husky. And so my dad did all the racing and training, because we were obviously just very little at the time. And then my brother and I kind of took over the racing portion of our kennel. And my dad, was very well known as a breeder and a trainer, and he did the majority of the breeding and the training. And my brother and I had the privilege of being able to travel all over North America and be able to race. And so he was the unsung hero in our family operation. Was my dad. He was the backbone of our breeding program, and he did all the puppy training, and we were just very privileged to be able to work with him.
Ross, when was when you started your own personal kennel then?
Well, I didn't start my own kennel. Basically, I took over the family kennel in 2001 when my dad passed away from cancer. And so we had been partners up to that point, and we both each had 50% share of the kennel. And then in 2001, it was quite sudden. He ended up with cancer and passed away within 2 years. And then we took over the kennel. And my wife and I, whom I'd married in 1995, Tammy, we took over the whole operation of the kennel. And, of course, that changed the dynamic of racing for us. Unfortunately, up to that point, we had the freedom of being able to travel for 3 to 4 months of the year. But but also in our operations, we had a big cattle ranch, a 1,700-acre cattle ranch that my dad and I were partners in, and electrical business and a music business, and so it really handcuffed Tammy and I when my dad passed away to be able to travel like we had previously before that.
So I know that you're retired and you don't have dogs in the circuit anymore. But in the heydays when you had a big kennel and you were racing all the open races throughout the Canada, Alaska, United States, how many dogs did you have in your kennel?
Well, on average, it was usually between 100 and 120. The most that we ever had in our kennel was 162, and that wasn't by choice. It was a good friend of mine. I don't know if you remember, KP, but there was a gentleman named Kurt Merritt, and he actually raced the Alaska circuit for a few years. Well, anyway, in 1995, he was killed in a tragic plane accident, and he had willed me his kennel, and I don't know if that was to get me back or if he thought he was going to be a blessing, but we ended up with Kurt's kennel, and you know what? It was we were able to raise his dogs and work him with our kennel, but that was a stretch. When you get to be a 160 dog kennel, it's a lot of work to look after and train and race those dogs.
Did you do everything by yourself and the family, or you had handlers like the streeper kennels they have?
We just had family.
Just
my
family.
wife and I and my dad. We didn't have any helpers until actually after my dad had passed away in 2001. And then in subsequent years, we did have some handlers that came in and worked in the kennel, just like the streepers are doing. But prior to 2001, it was all just family.
Ross, when you started your kennel, was it specifically for sprint racing, or like some of the other people we talked to? Some of them they had working dogs actually. What was yours?
Well, we had toyed with the idea of expanding and going into the genre of mid distance or long distance racing because of the exposure that the sport was getting at the time when we were racing in the 90s. The Iditarod was a very big race. It had $500,000 purse, I believe, and so there was a lot of exposure and such. So we had toyed with that. I'd actually gone. I'm not sure if you remember, but right after the Open North American, a few years, I jotted off to Yellowknife and ran the 150 miler with my sprint team, and it wasn't the greatest idea to just jump from sprint racing to kind of the mid distance type of genre, but it was an eye opener, and I did come to realize after running some of those longer events that I enjoyed the sprint racing. So then we stuck with that.
I remember your dogs, and I actually surprisingly, through all these years, I raced with you guys only once, and it was years and years ago. And Tammy and myself, actually, we raced in a race in Canada, in Canmore. But I remember your dogs very well. They were wickedly fast, very, very leggy. What was the bloodline behind them, and how did you develop your lines that we can still see around the world?
Well, it's quite interesting because breeding dogs is not an art. It's not a science, because you can take two very, very gifted, talented dogs, breed them together, and genetically they don't work. And so my dad always had the philosophy. His rule of thumb was, we don't breed bloodlines, we breed tug lines, and that there was a lot of truth to that. I mean, we would try every year or every 2 years. We would try to bring some new blood into our kennel and cross them, and we would use some of the Champagne bloodlines when Charlie and Roxy were dominant, and we had some of the Eddie Streeper bloodlines in there that we had tried, and we had some success with their bloodlines mixing in with ours. But over the years, we just tried different things, and if we had good results, then we would carry those lines and continue breeding them and line breeding them. So basically back in 1970, the first Alaskans we bought came from the Reddington lines. In 1974, we bought a dog from Tom Mathias, which basically goes back to a dog named Brandy. And then in 1979, we purchased another dog named Dandy from George Atla. In 1984, we ended up getting another dog from the Reddington lines, and that was the grandson of Scotty. And then 1987, and just kind of running through how our breeding program went, and we had bred to a dog of Mike Boaz's, a dog named Billy, which goes back to Harvey Drake's lines. And then 1990, we did an outcross with one of our Saunderson Huskies to a dog named Burner out of the right lines, and that's how we got Victor. And then Victor became our dominant leader. He produced Gem and Grit and Gunner, our other leaders, and we had kind of a dynasty from 1991 through until about 1996, racing that front end, and that was kind of the I guess the foundation of the breeding program. The Saunderson Husky that we developed was through Victor. Hey, so along the way we've crossbred with pretty much all the top kennels in Alaska and in the United States and Canada, and we would just look at how they crossed with our lines, and if they crossed well, then we would continue to line breed with those lines, and then bring in new blood every few years.
Yeah, obviously Victor is a famous dog. Who doesn't know this dog? He is in so many pedigrees and all over, pedigree books of the North American Championship. Definitely. Did you ever get into hounds at all with the Europeans?
Well, we started out the same way as Terry did, and we actually went down and purchased 2 hounds from Joe Runyon. He was working with the hunting dogs down in Arizona, and we had purchased 2 of them. We did some crossbreeding. We weren't really happy with how they had crossed, so then we ended up breeding to some of the Eagle stuff that when Terry Streeper had gone to Europe, and then he had bred Hop to one of the European dogs, and Mike was born. Then we had a dog named Timmy that came out of those lines, and we bred him, and we were pretty, we had a lot of success with that. We were pretty happy with that. So the dogs that I have in my yard today, they go back to the Saunderson Husky and to some of the Eagle Ellis lines. So that's the cross that we have now.
And when I talked to Terry last time, he said he was trying to get away from these high percentage hounds and get back and focus back on the sprint style Alaskan Huskies. Is this something you are seeing also, or no, you prefer getting this mixture still going?
Well, most of the dogs that we have would only be a quarter or an eighth hound. And what we would like to do is, I think, would be the same thing. We haven't raised any puppies for probably 5 years. Since 2016 was our last litter of pups. But we are going to hopefully, if Canada and the United States open up their borders again. My son is 14 and my daughter's 16, and they want to race, but the last 2 years we have closed borders and we're not allowed to go to Alaska. So we're hoping to get back in the sport. I know that you had mentioned earlier you thought I was retired, and if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I was going to be retiring from the sport, no, that was never my intention. It's only to take a break and get caught up there with the farm and with the businesses. But we're still hoping to get back on racing on the trails against you guys up there in Alaska. And so we'll have to just wait to see what the political powers do. But we are going to be raising some more puppies, and we will be breeding back to the Husky line just to strengthen them up and to try and get, I know, it's just they're a little bit more durable, I would think. KP is what I've found. Hey.
You just put a giant smile on my face when I heard that you're going to come back and race us. I mean, Robert, the guy is a legend. I mean, he has won so many championships, and racing against him would be an honor, whoever is doing open racing actually, and I hope to race you one day. We were little people when I met you guys. We raced 4 and 6 dogs only, and we didn't do open back then. We do small opens now, and some of the trophies that I'm winning right now has your name on them from years ago, and I'm like, oh my God, my name is next to this guy's name, Saunderson's. So how did the kids they are growing into be junior mushers? I mean, obviously, as you said, you've been out for a certain period of time, and how are they getting so excited about it? Is it just in the genes?
Well, I don't know if it's in the genes, but they enjoy working with the animals, and it was such a big part of our life, KP, that they want to experience that. And the fact is that we want our kids to experience that. A big part of our sport was the people. We really met a lot of wonderful people, right from Saranac Lake to Kotzebue and Norvik. We traveled all across the country, and we just met thousands of people that were just like-minded. They love dogs. They love the world of sled dog sport, and there are just a lot of good people out there. We miss them, and we want our family to experience what my wife and I experienced with all the years of traveling that we did. So we're hoping that we can one day get on the trails again and have that fun experience with our kids. Eh?
What was the circuit you mentioned, going to different communities, and how would you just explain to me what one of the racing years used to be? You leave home and load the truck, and what do you do? Like, give me some of the examples of the cross countries you did.
Yeah, well, in 1985, I think that was the first year that my brother and I. So my brother, he ran the open team, I ran the 8 and the 6 dog class, and we would leave our home before Christmas. We would head down to Minnesota and race the circuit down there through Keller, Shooks, Grand Rapids, Bemidji, Ely, and then make our way down to Saranac Lake or some of the races out in Laconia. We'd head down on that eastern circuit down there, and then we'd boot back up and race, come up to Alaska and race. And so, like, I didn't actually race the open class, the Anchorage for Rendezvous, until 1991. So most of the early racing in the 80s was actually down in the lower 48, and that's where I met the Joey Reddingtons and Garth Wrights and Harvey Drake and George Atla, and all those guys were down there racing with Eddie Streeper and Terry Streeper and Curtis Earhart. All those teams, all of those guys were coming down and racing there, and that's where we got to race. Even Dr. Roland Lombard. I mean, all these legends. We had the privilege of racing with these guys, and so we would leave before Christmas. We would travel that circuit and then end up in Alaska, and we'd be on the road for 12 weeks. And it was a lot of fun, a lot of good memories.
Ross, if we could just switch gears just for a second, I have a question for you about a topic that we have never talked about on the podcast. You had said that, and pardon, I don't recall the name you said, about inheriting a kennel when a person passed away. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Again, we've never talked about that subject before.
Okay, well, yeah, Kurt Merritt was a chiropractor in Prince George. Him and his brother, Larry Merritt, used to race sled dogs, and they had a kennel of, well, approximately about 60 dogs when they were working together. And then Larry, his older brother, retired, and Kurt ran a team, and he used to travel with me in the lower 48 and then into Alaska, and he raced in Alaska for a few years. And tragically, in 1995, in September, he had his own plane, and he was out flying, and he had a plane accident, and he was passed away. And so I had been living with him in Prince George because I was actually going to school down there doing my electrical apprenticeship program. So I would have my dog kennel down there and train my dogs, and he had his kennel down there, and so we worked together quite closely. And when he passed away, he had willed me his kennel, and it was he hadn't told me about this. This was a complete surprise. So when he passed away 2 days later, I got the call, and his mom and dad said, Kurt, we found his will, and he wants you to take all of his sled dogs. And I considered it an honor. I mean, Kurt was an awesome man, and he had a good team, and he had a lot of our bloodlines in his kennel, and he had Eddie Streeper bloodlines in his kennel. He had all the top bloodlines from all over the world at that time. So he had a really good team, and they worked in with mine really well. So it was quite interesting. That I'd never heard of that happening before, but we were honored to take that kennel and to represent him for the next few years of racing.
And one final question in regard to that: did he happen to leave you any money with the care of that, or no? It's just, here are the dogs. You know what I'm saying? I want you to have the dogs, but it's on you to take care of them, if you know what I mean. Yeah, absolutely. Kurt knew that we had to set up the ability to be able to take care of the dogs. So no, there wasn't any bursary or any of his winnings or hardware that went with it. It was just the dogs. But we got the dogs in the kennel and the walk-in freezer. Excellent. So because we had to go up, basically we had one walk-in freezer. We needed another one to be able to feed 160 dogs. We were going through a lot of dog food at that time. I bet. KP? Yeah.
Ross, when did you actually stop racing competitively? What year was it?
Well, in 2009 was the last time I ran the Open North American.
And what happened to majority of our dogs? Did they go to in one specific kennel, or you spread them up around the world?
Yeah, no. Most of the race dogs were sold out in Quebec to Martin Desjardins and to Claude Bellerive. They purchased the majority of the race dogs at that time, and all the other dogs that we had, we sold some of the younger dogs, I believe, to Mark Hardum, and we just had a few of the retirees left, and we kept them all, and we ran them until they basically passed of old age, and then we raised a couple more litters just to keep our bloodlines and our genetics going, and we're now ready to hit the trails again. We just need the political powers that be to be able to open up the borders and let us start to travel again, and let us come and have fun with you guys up there.
If the borders are open this year, do you think there's any chance to bring the kids for the Junior North American, or yourself to do any of the races?
Well, not this year, but next year, quite possibly, yeah. If those borders open up, you could see us next year, possibly.
That would be fantastic.
That's all I have for Ross. I don't have anything else. KP, anything before we go?
No, I wanted to thank you, Ross, for being with us the last 20 minutes or so. It was a pleasure listening to you, your stories, and literally looking forward to have you among us in Alaska, race you, see your dogs, see your family, and enjoy our camaraderie in our sport. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys for having me, and I just want to say a big shout out to you guys, everyone that works with the sled dog, the sport of sled dogs, and everyone that's been keeping the torches going up there. You guys are the heroes. You guys are the frontline workers right now, and I really appreciate the work that you guys do to keep this program on the air and keep people informed of what's going on around the world.
Well, thank you very much, Ross, and thank you for being on, and we'll talk again soon, okay?
All right. Take care, guys.
All right. On behalf of our guest today and my co-host, KP, this is Robert for the Dog Driver Show. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From First Paw Media, this is the Dog Driver Show. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you can see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert Forto and Kurosh Partow. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media.